I've been able to do some. I'm telling you what, I've never done so much trying to figure out some things. With these feasts, you can't just, if you want to know what's going on now, if you want to know how these celebrations are done now, it's difficult unless you really do some searching in different places. And so I've done a lot of searching in an effort to, first off, to answer to a question David and I particularly had. Number one was the drinking of wine at the Passover, because I know for a fact that it says that there would be no leaven in the whole house. It's not just, you couldn't eat nothing. The Jewish laws forbid you to have it in the house, period. The day before the Passover, several times in the Word of God it refers to the before Jesus' crucifixion. It was the preparation. I take it that was the day before the Passover, because the day before the Passover, everything had to be done that was necessary. You had to get rid of it. You had to search your house and make sure there was nothing there. And again, I tell you this, and I got this from a Jewish website. If you could not or did not, maybe you had a bunch of stuff that you didn't want to get rid of, you would take a Gentile's name. If you had a Gentile friend, you put his name on that. And it says that that's his. It's not mine, Lord. I call it splitting hairs. But again, the Judaism as it is practiced, to me, is a lot of splitting hairs. In Jesus' day, the trouble he had was with religious rulers and splitting hairs. When we look at some of the circumstances, we look at the Bible and we say, on the day, like on the Passover, we talked about the Passover already, but on the Passover, there were certain foods and all this stuff, and the first Passover is different from every other one, because the first one had to do with the application of the blood on the doorposts of the lintel. It has to do with the death of Jesus on the cross. Paul said, Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. So he is the fulfillment of what we see in the Passover. But God told him to celebrate it, or to do it, to make that thing every year. And so, but as it was practiced then after that, as long as they had the temple, they could make the animal sacrifices. They could sacrifice the lamb and all those things. Well, when the temple went away, there was no way to do that. So what and how it's practiced, that's completely different in the circumstances. Well, the rest of them are the same way. In most of these feasts, there was a sacrifice that went along with it. They say a lamb, and also the different other offerings that were there. So, but let's clear things up concerning. First off, I gave you this sheet so you could look at it. Michelle helped me. We sat down there. I'm sitting there the other morning going through my computer and all these places. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to figure out why you can drink wine on the Passover, and it is leaven. It has to have yeast in it. You can't have alcoholic wine without yeast." Okay, so we go to a website, and this is a Jew. Why is it permitted to drink wine on Passover when it's fermented with yeast? Isn't yeast forbidden on Passover? Well, the answer is yes. But look at the answer there to it. Of the hundreds of species of yeast, the Passover prohibition only applies to yeast, which is a product of one of the following grains: wheat, barley, oat, spelt, I don't know what that is, or rye. Now, don't ask me how you make yeast. I mean, I've looked at how they do it, but I figured that was not germane to the circumstances. I don't know how you make yeast. All I know is they decided somewhere, and it's probably some rabbi, that said, well, this should only apply to yeast that comes from these grains: wheat, barley, oat, whatever. But yeast which is the product of grapes or its sugars is not considered chametz, or leavened food. Again, I consider it splitting hairs. You say, well, God said no leaven. Well, they said, some Jew along the line, some rabbi said, well, as long as we don't have yeast made from this. By the way, how many of you have used Flashman's yeast if you do make yeast bread or anything?
Years ago.
You'll be glad to know this. Flashman's is a kosher yeast. Now, there are kosher yeasts.
I don't know.
David, you think that's funny, huh? Well, that's the thing. There are kosher yeasts, and there's non-kosher yeast. But the fact of the matter is, what we've got to is as long as the wine. Now this has to go along with it too. There are certain wines and stuff that are not kosher. So a Jew that is preparing, say, for the Passover feast or everything, he has to make sure that he picks out a wine that is not, or that is kosher. And there are certain, wines that are established as kosher and some are not. Manischewitz, you ever heard of Manischewitz wine? I have years ago. Of course, they don't advertise much of this stuff anymore. But it's kosher. It ought to be. It's made by a Jew. Notice by the name. But this is the circumstances of why you can have wine at the Passover as it is celebrated today. Now, I can't tell you how it was celebrated 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. All I know is somewhere along the line, some rabbi made a decision. And that's how much of the things that we see today within the religion was established. Jesus had to face that daily. They were either quoting Moses, but see, within the Jewish religion, even today, you had a great collection of what were oral laws. This is not written in the Bible in any place. There were oral laws and traditions. Jesus talked about the traditions of your fathers. He said you've set aside the law with the traditions of your fathers. And that's what he was speaking of. Part of the circumstances with them had to do with the fact that the traditions, something that was passed down from rabbi, some notable rabbi. So somewhere along the line, one decided if you made yeast, and I don't know how they make yeast, but if you made it and used the sugars from grapes, that thing's locked up on me. And it's only been going 7 minutes. If that happened, you could use it. And again, like I said, in my research for this thing, and Michelle helped me, she finally found that printout that I did right there. You could have wine as long as its yeast is from sugars or from grapes. So that's settled. I always maintained, and I have to correct myself. Now, listen, again, I say I correct myself. I know how it is. This is how it is celebrated today. If we go back 3,000 years or 2,000 years, I do not know how it was done then, because I wasn't there, and neither do some of these other people. And I have not been able to delve back far enough to know when the first rabbi decided that this was kosher and something's not kosher. And that word kosher, it simply means it's allowed. And you'll find it as you read and study some different things. But this is the thing that we need to understand here. I need to separate this. And so that settles that, at least according to how Jewish traditions serve the Passover today. David asked this when I gave out that. I did a new one. Had the other day that had the Jewish months on it. We know as we read the Bible that there are months mentioned in the Bible. They don't correspond to what's here. Particularly when we go to the Passover, the Bible refers to it as the month of Abib. Well, that's English. If you look at that printout I gave you, over on the far side, pre-exile name Aviv, which is the same thing, only that's the Jewish spelling instead of the English spelling. Up until the time of the Babylonian captivity, there were 4 months that were mentioned by name. One of them is here in Abib, Ziv, the second one, and the third one there, Shavat, and Tisha B'Av. I ain't do good on these Hebrew names. And down in the 7th one, Etanim. Now, there are also, those are the pre-exile names. Up until the time of the Babylonian captivity, these were the names that were used in Hebrew writings for these months. That's the reason we have it in Exodus chapter 12, where God said this month of Abib is when you begin the Passover. It begins the Jewish calendar is for religious purposes. While they're in Babylon, they turn around and they begin to use the month names that are attached to the Babylonian calendar. They become more Babylonian during that period of time, and they carried it back home. The names that you see there, the month name in English, are the month names that were established after they come back in the Babylonian captivity. What we have in our Bible in the Old Testament, there's just a few months that were mentioned and has a name. There are some that are written different. There where you have Kislev in the 9th month. If you look and I didn't look up when it is. The month is called Chislev, which is just a different spelling of the same month. So you do have a difference sometimes when you have the spelling difference in English and the Hebrew. But that was what December was, and I think it's I can't remember where it was, but that is the month for December. But sometimes it's pronounced different. But this is what I want us to understand. These are the months as they are mentioned, as they are given now, if you were looking up these things, and when it is. And that, as we went over this before, their months do not correspond with our months. Their feast days are always celebrated on the same day. Passover is always on the first day of the month of Nisan now, or Abib, the way it was. Or rather on the 14th day of the month. But their months are not different. I'm not going to go over that again. You still got that thing over there about how they do it different. They do it on a lunar thing. They have to add a leap month in every 2 years, and in order to keep things back up to date. Or one of these feasts would happen instead of having the Passover in the spring, it'd be in the wintertime if you kept on and didn't do what they do. So every couple of years they institute a leap month where we have a leap day, a leap day for our leap year. We had a day in. So, but I just wanted us to understand these are the differences. When you read your Bible, don't look and say, "Well, the Bible's wrong." That's not the way it is within the Hebrews today. The fact of the matter is, they changed. God didn't change.
Yeah.
They changed. But the Jews, when the days that the Bible was written, that we have with the Passover, and much of the Old Testament period, up until the time they went into Babylonian captivity, this was the names of the months. And by the way, all months weren't named. Today, we have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Several of our day names are actually named after, Roman gods and Greek gods as far as that goes. But if you look down there to this one, in the 4th month, Tammuz, that's a Babylonian god. And as a matter of fact, if you read a book of Ezekiel, you'll find out God stomped on them because he had them. The women were worshiping this guy, Tammuz here. That thing is just jumped 2 times and it's still not recorded. Still not got the thing yet. So when they went to the Babylonian calendar, some of this stuff should have happened. This is a Babylonian, or rather a Greek god, that they were worshiping that during Ezekiel's day that God condemned. Why would you name I say that. Saturday is named after Saturn, that Greek god. Thursday is essentially Thor's day. Thor is a Norse god. So we're doing the same thing today, whether we think about it or not. We are naming our days of the week. Friday, Freya is a Norse goddess. The days of our weeks, our days of our weeks are named after some heathen god. Nobody thinks about it. Most people don't even know where the names come from. But Thor's day, Freya's day, Saturn. And so that is some of the things that we're facing here. But the nation of Israel changed the days that the month was named after the Babylonian captivity. That's the reason we have in the Bible, it will have a name for the month. And then if you was to have a Jewish friend or whatever, and he said, well, that's not what we call that month. No, that's what God called it. they changed. God didn't change.
Yeah.
And they allowed a lot of Babylonian stuff to enter into the circumstances. So I wanted to bring that out and kind of help us out, because Dave asked me that the other day when we was looking at that printout I had. Why the first day of the month is Nisan? Well, now we know. God called it Abib because that was the month it was when the Jews were brought out of Egypt. And after they come back from the Babylonian captivity, while there, they picked up the Babylonian calendar and brought it into Judaism. Now, let's look at something here. I want to look at the what we call first fruits. It's also connected with the Passover in quite a bit way. And actually, this is back over Leviticus 23, verse 9. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying that when you become in the land which I give unto you, shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. But there's also in verse 12 an offering besides that. Offer that day when you wave the sheaf and a he lamb without blemish of the first year for a burnt offering unto the Lord. And also there's a meat offering. By the way, when you read those where it says meat offering in these things, it is meal. Now you say, well, what's the difference? Well, in the days in which this thing is written, bread was a staple product. So it's called, for the most part, meat offering, but it's talking about an offering of a grain. It's talking about wheat or barley. How do you know that? Well, a meat offering there should be 2/10 deals of fine flour mingled with oil. So when you read some of those things, just don't gloss over it. Understand why it's doing that. I used to say, I said it's a meat offering. Well, that's the way it is termed in the Authorized Version, because for the most part, bread in that day and time was really emphasized. Now, if you still got that printout I gave you that looks like this one right here, it'll say Sephira, counting of the omer. An omer is a measurement of dry. We use bushel. I mean, I picked a bushel of beans. You buy a bushel of peaches, a bushel of this, or a bushel of that, or whatever the circumstances are. Well, this is the Hebrew correspondent to that. It's a measure of the dry offering. In Hebrew, this is called Sephira, the counting of the omer. And that's all it means. That's Sephira, counting. Now, ha-omer, it just means the counting of the omer. That is the first off. It begins what will eventually end up as Pentecost. But let me show you something here. Let me give you something that's not in here. I don't know whether I gave you this or not. See this? I may have just made this for me. If I didn't, I'm just going to read it to you.
Yeah, because I don't see it.
All right. Let me explain how this, because it's not given to happen on a particular day as some of the feasts are. But it's important to establish how this is done, because it's beginning from here. You have to count the 49 days or the 7 Sabbaths and the day past the Sabbath in order to get to Pentecost, and it is important. Let me read you this. The Torah says, in the context of introducing the commandment of Sephirat HaOmer, and God gave this instruction to Moses. I wish I'd give you this. They do not write out God. Anytime you find one of these writings in the Hebrew, it may be in English, but they will not write out God. They'll write G/D. So they will not write God out.
Wait, how come?
Huh?
How come they don't do that?
Because they don't feel worthy to write His name. As a matter of fact, in what we have, when we read in the Old Testament where it says Jehovah, in the writings of the Hebrews, let's go back to when they wrote the New Testament. It was YHVH.
Yeah.
Well, actually, but they didn't have vowels. They got vowels by doing some other thing, whatever. And it said, those scribes that Jesus had to deal with, when it come time to write God, Elohim, or Jehovah, they're writing with a quill pen. They would take whatever they're writing with and they get a completely new one in order to write God or Jehovah. Now, if they'd have paid as much attention to spiritually worship of God and Jehovah as they did like that in the form, they'd have been better off.
Yeah, it would have been.
Because a lot of the things that Jesus pronounced judgment on, like in their giving of the offerings and the prayer, was nothing wrong with praying, nothing wrong with the giving of alms and their tithes. But they did it wrong. And that's still something that's common in the church today. There is such a thing as doing a good thing the wrong way. But I digress here. So they're going to give us here, and God gave this instruction to Moses, Moshe, to communicate. Speak to the children of Israel and say that when you enter the land which I am giving to you, and you harvest its crop, you shall bring the omer. The omer is a dry measure containing the volume of 43.2 average eggs. That means nothing to you and I. Most people today don't even know what a bushel is. You go to the Kroger's and you buy something. You don't buy a bushel of anything. Most people don't anymore. It's the amount of barley flour that had to be brought. It's also the name of the offering. The first of the harvest to the Kohen. I wish that I printed this one out. Kohen, Kohen. It said they brought it to the Kohen. Let me give you this. And it shall move the omer forward, backward, right, and left, up and down before God. GD. As an expression of your free will on the day after the Shabbat or the Sabbath. Shall a Kohen move it in the manner described. He shall make on the day of the ritual movement of the Omer a lamb unblemished in its first year as a burnt offering to God. And its associated grain offering should be 2/10 ephahs, another dry measure, fine barley flour mixed with oil, a burnt offering to God, with a pleasant aroma, and its libation of wine, 1/4 of an hin, which is a liquid measure. You shall not eat bread, nor roasted kernels, nor full kernels, until this very same day, until you bring the offering to your God, an eternal statute for all your generations wherever you may live. Now the importance, and this is just given real quickly, as I read here in Leviticus chapter 23, but the fact of the matter is, in verse 14, again, Leviticus 23, you shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor green ears until the selfsame day that you brought an offering unto your God. And that's what's written here. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings, which meant springtime. You could not eat anything that you had planted until you brought the offering of the first fruits. And notice something. It was the day after the Sabbath, which is Saturday. It was brought on what we would term Sunday. Now, it's important to understand these things because God put it like this at a purpose. I said here in the name of the offering, the first of the harvest to the Kohen, Kohen. In English, you'll find it written usually Cohen. Do you know what that means? It's the priest. Where it says you'll bring it to the Kohen, you'll bring it to the priest. Now, today, people say, well, how would if they shall build the temple again, how would they know who is a priest? Any Jew today with the last name of Kohen is one of the priests. He's in that family. They've kept track of it to the point where if anyone is born into the lineage of Aaron, his last name is Kohen.
Neat.
Most people don't realize or don't know. I didn't know it till a few years ago. George M. Cohen, you hear about him, the music and everything that he, did back years ago. Well, Kohen, he was in the lineage of Aaron. They keep track of these things, folks. We don't, but they do. And how it was done was very much important. He said you'll move it forward, backward, left, right, up, down. Now let me mention this before we go on to this. This is called the counting of the Omer. And it's important because this is a day that's going to begin the days to get up to Pentecost or the Feast of Weeks. But it had to be done. Now notice something here. Let me give you this. I didn't think it'd take much long to get this far. This is not just a go out in my field and grab a bunch of wheat or whatever it is, bring it to the priest and say, here you go. No. if he goes, and again, let's get something here. The feast of first fruits, it's important. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he said, Christ the first fruits. The resurrection of Jesus is the fulfillment of the festival of first fruits. When was Jesus' resurrection? 3 days after the Passover. Right? Now the Passover doesn't always begin on the Sabbath day. It begins on the 14th day of the month. So it can happen different days of the week. Now we say Jesus was crucified on Friday because the Bible said the next day was a Sabbath day. And they say, well, he must have been crucified on Friday. The next day, would have been the seventh day Sabbath. But it doesn't say that. What it does say is a Sabbath. What happens the day after the Passover? Feast of Unleavened Bread. The first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is a Sabbath, and the seventh day is a Sabbath. So, when we look at this thing, Jesus was crucified on the Passover. 3 days later, he's risen. And what we have here, they were bringing this thing to the priest on the day after the Passover, our day after the Sabbath. It cannot happen on the Sabbath. Well, again, we say the Passover is not connected to the seventh day Sabbath. What we're trying to get to here is it had to be the day after the Sabbath, because you count 7 Sabbaths, or 49 days plus 1, in order to get to Pentecost. So in the midst of that Passover week and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, he was supposed to bring his offering of the first fruits. And it wasn't just a little bit of this. If he walked out in his field, whatever he can gather up that is already come up in the spring of the year, this is early in the spring, he's supposed to cut it out, bring it, and give it to the priest. Now, the priest waves a sheaf of it before God, but the rest of it went to the priests for them to use for their own meals. So it was important for the nation of Israel to bring their first fruits to the temple, because that was partly how the Levites survived. They're not planting. They did not get a portion of land.
Yeah.
They did get some areas around some of the cities in order for their cattle, but they didn't plant a field if the first fruits were given as an offering, right? But it was given the day after the Sabbath. And then if you go on down into verse 15, you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even on the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall ye number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. You shall bring out of your habitation 2 wave loaves of 2/10 deals. They should be of fine flour. They should be baken with leaven. They are the first fruits unto the Lord. Now, there's also a lamb that should be offered with this, but of course, after the destruction of the temple, these things couldn't happen. But yet they continue on as if it was. Now, at the bottom of that thing of counting the Omer, it begins to talk about the Passover, or not the Passover, Pentecost. In Hebrew, it is the Feast of Weeks. Pentecost we get from the Greek. It's the number 50. It is one of the feast days that every male Jew was supposed to present himself to the temple. And it was an important one. Let me read you this, or let's read in part of what it says right here. It is observed on the day following the 49th and final day in the counting of the Omer, which we looked at. In the current era of the fixed Jewish calendar, this puts the day of Shabbat in a 6th Sivan in Israel, and in Reformed Judaism, it's a 1-day holiday. Elsewhere, it's a 2-day holiday extending through the 7th. What you have is to understand something here. This is it was an important feast day for the nation of Israel. What it means to us is we find in the book of Acts It says there in the book of Acts, and when the day of Pentecost was fully come, we have 120 are assembled in that upper room, praying. The apostles are there. Any of the other followers of Jesus are in Jerusalem. 120 people are assembled on the day of Pentecost, and that's the day that the Spirit of God forms the church. That's the birthday of the church.
Yeah.
Now, the difference, if you notice again what I read here and what I read in the Word of God, in the Feast of First Fruits, they brought raw grain. They brought a sheaf. And it was weighed before the Lord in a particular way. Now, this time, they're not bringing the sheaf or the grain. They're bringing bread loaves. Let me get to my rest of my notes here, or whatever, so I don't miss something here. Pentecost, yeah. The sheaves have now become loaves. The important part of what we see here, or why is this different from the circumstances? Let's just look in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 17. The complement of this with Jesus and with the church and with whatever, 1 Corinthians 10, 17. For we being many are one bread and one body, for we are all partakers of that one bread. Now it's important to see this. The formation of the church makes a solid and complete thing. We are His body. Again, 1 Corinthians 12. Where the one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. Now, again, in the book of Acts, it says when the day of Pentecost was fully come. What that means is the day of Pentecost is fulfilled. Jesus, when the church is formed there on the day of Pentecost, you have a fulfillment. See, all of these feast days weren't just given for Israel. Israel is commemorating these things, but they're an established prophecy concerning what is going to come. First fruits is resurrection. Well, of course, the Passover is the sacrifice of Jesus. Leaven is a feast of unleavened bread. He is pure. He's holy. There's no faults or anything within Him. Then we have the first fruits, and that's resurrection. Paul said, Christ our first fruits. Afterwards, they that are Christ at His coming.
Amen.
So first fruits are important for us because it shows that we have a hope. We have something. But then, now there's a long period of time between first fruits and Pentecost. 50 days, actually. Now we know that Jesus had a 40-day ministry with His disciples after His resurrection. It tells us that in the New Testament. He tells His disciples to tarry at Jerusalem till ye be endued from on high. And He's telling them about the Spirit of God that's going to come. Now it nowhere says that 10 days elapsed between His ascension and Pentecost. But Pentecost is 50 days, and it corresponds to exactly with the formation of the church. This is a feast that's given that pictures the church. It's no longer individual pieces of grain, but it's a loaf. And that's what we are. It doesn't make any difference whether we're from Timbuktu or Knoxville, Tennessee. We are all one in Christ. There is no separate church. There's no church is black, church is white, whatever the circumstance. We are one church.
Amen.
And that's what Pentecost shows. 120 people began that day. And here we find out this is our beginnings. So that's the importance when we talk about. But to the Jews, they don't call it Pentecost. It's a feast of weeks. And but it is actually that period of time that we need to understand. It's a pretty good extended period of time. Which brings us to the Feast of Trumpets. And the seventh month. The seventh month is a high holy month. You think, well, Passover is a wonderful circumstance. But within the seventh month, you have three of the biggest feast days of the year, and one that's added with the nation of Israel. But it's going to correspond to what we have next, which is the Feast of Trumpets. This is, again, look in Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 23. The Lord spake unto Moses, and speaking of the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, in the first day of the month, you have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets and holy convocation. You should do no work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Now, it doesn't specify what kind of offering that is, which is noteworthy because most of these things are really exact. There's an offering to be made with it. So what is the Feast of Trumpets? Let me give you this. The nation of Israel today does not celebrate, essentially, the Feast of Trumpets. But they do celebrate Rosh Hashanah. If you look on this handout that I gave you before, got the little food there and the little bottle of wine and apples and stuff. Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. In the Jewish calendar, this is the first day of the year. It's like New Year's Day. You say, well, why is it not January? I don't know why it's in January with us. It just is. Notice, but this is how it is done. Head of the year, or Rosh Hashanah, is a day of memorial or remembrance. And the day of judgment, God appears in the role of king, remembering and judging each person individually according to his and her deeds, and making a decree for each person for the following year. It's characterized by one specific mitzvah, blowing of the shofar. That's the ram's horn. According to the Torah, this is the first day of the 7th month of the calendar year. Marks beginning of a 10-day period leading up to Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. Now, according to one of two Talmudic opinions. Now, the Talmud is those oral traditions that I talked to you about a while ago. It's all contained in the Talmud. And there's opinions there. The creation of the world was completed on Rosh Hashanah. Now, that some rabbi decided that. Well, I've read about the creation of the world and it doesn't say anything about it. As a matter of fact, Rosh Hashanah, or the first day of the year, is not even in the Bible. Now, morning prayer services are lengthy on Rosh Hashanah, and the focus of things is described about majesty and judgment. Remembrance the birth of the world and the blowing of the shofar. That Ashkenazi Jews, I'll give you something on that, and let me just go through reading it. Recite the brief Tashlich prayer, a symbolic casting off the previous year's sins during the afternoon of Rosh Hashanah. The Bible specifies Rosh Hashanah as a one-day holiday, but it is not Rosh Hashanah. It's tradition celebrated for 2 days, even in the land of Israel. God gave them the Feast of Trumpets on the first day of the 7th month, and it has a completely different meaning than what we have here. 7th month, in the first day of the month, you have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets. Well, what they've done, they've mashed the two together. Trumpets historically indicate a gathering or regathering. God told the nation of Israel in the wilderness, he said, to make you 2 silver trumpets. He gave them instructions on how to blow an assembly. I mean, you got to picture this. They're spread out in many, many acres of ground here. How do you get everybody? You don't have telephones, you don't have cell phones, you can't send everybody a text message. So they blow the shofar, those trumpets, for a gathering. Now, let me give you this. Look at Isaiah chapter 27, verse 13. Let me read you some things here. Isaiah said, this shall come to pass in that day. Now, when Isaiah and these prophets use the term in that day, they're usually talking about it in the last days. The day of the Lord's, the Messiah's coming. That the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt shall worship the Lord in the holy mount at Jerusalem. Let me give you this, Matthew chapter 24. Look over here. This is what David was giving some of these the other day in that messages he had. Matthew chapter 24, as you get to the end of Jesus' life, Matthew 24 is the Olivet Discourse. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. They shall see the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. They shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Yeah.
Trumpets, God gave it because he knew that in the end days, and then there's going to be a regathering of the nation of Israel. You say, well, that's happened now. They got their own country. They do not have what God is talking about here. There's more Jews in New York City than there is in Israel. They have not turned back to the Lord. They're not being regathered on a purpose of celebrating the Messiah, which is Jesus. And that's going to happen during the Great Tribulation and all these things. They do not celebrate trumpets as such, but they do lump this celebration that God gave on the first day of the seventh month in with the beginning of the new year, and they do celebrate it. And it looks to having a time, I don't know. New Year's to us is New Year's Eve. Y'all, everybody, a lot of people just get drunk and spend the next day in bed suffering for it. I don't know all of these things here. All I know is there's a blowing of the trumpets, celebrating in the midst of Rosh Hashanah, that new year, to celebrate that beginning. By the way, I told you this before. This is how they also signal the beginning of the new moon each month. Because how do you know if he was a Jew living up in Bethel or up in the northern part of the city or town or country or down in the bottom part of it? How do you know when that month began? To do your service. It's important. They were commanded to do these on a certain day of the month. Now, what's important today is we need to understand God has some exact things given, and he means to be done exactly like he gave it. Yeah. So in Jerusalem, I told you this the other day, he had to have two witnesses, a priest did. When he had two witnesses come and said, I see the little sliver of the moon. That signaled the new moon, and they blow the shofar in Jerusalem, and the cities on up above it and below it. When they heard it, they would blow it and pass the word along. And that way every Jew knew today begins the new month. But Yom Kippur is one of the most holy days of the year for the nation of Israel. And it's also an important one for us also. Take this, the printout that I gave you. It has the guy on the front blowing the shofar. Now, we know that the celebration of the Day of Atonement is completely different from how it's given in the Bible. It has to be because there's no offerings that's given in the Bible. We know that when we talk about the Day of Atonement, I'm not going to get this. I can't rush through this.
Yeah, don't rush. What time is it?
It's 20 minutes till.
Okay.
Now, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. I'll give you a little Hebrew here. Y-O-M means day. So if you're reading anything that's Jewish, you see the word Yom, it means day. As a matter of fact, I've read in different places where the Day of Atonement is just referred to as Yom, because it's given that much of a it is that big to the nation of Israel. Its central theme still with them is atonement and reconciliation. But I'm not going to begin this. I'm going to have another day with this because I'm not going to rush through it because the Day of Atonement is too important. But what we need to understand is what I've tried to do with these is to give us an idea of how God's laid it out in the first place, but how it has to be done today because of the absence of the temple. It's not there. The sacrifices can't happen. We do believe that during the beginning of the Great Tribulation, somehow or another, the temple will have to be rebuilt. The reason for that is Jesus said, when you see that abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, which means you have to have a holy place to have that abomination of desolation spoken of, and it happens in the midst of the week, by the way.
Yeah.
So it is in the after 3.5 years of the beginning of the Great Tribulation, you have the beginning of the Great Tribulation. So these things are important for us to see because they have an aspect for us today. First fruits. I also liken this to when I got saved. What can I offer God? Nothing. Mm-hmm. He is the first fruits. Resurrection is where we have hope. But Christ is our first fruit. Christ the first fruits. Afterwards, Paul said, they that are Christ at his coming. Pentecost is the birthday of the church. It's measured from the day that the wave offering was made there in the temple. And notice something. It's always on Sunday. Now, they don't call it Sunday. In the Hebrew, at the time, let's go on back to then. It was day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. They just put Yom in front of Yom in 1. And I don't remember what the days are. I've got so much going around in here. But it's important to us to know. People at the Seventh-day Adventist, they say you're supposed to worship on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was never given as a worship day. Read a book. Never given as a worship day. Never. Never. It was a day of rest.
Yeah.
I mean, you do nothing. Today, a Seventh-day Adventist breaks the law in driving more than just a short walking distance to wherever he's meeting.
Yeah.
There's a limit to how far you could travel. Today, a Jew at 6 o'clock on a Friday, if he's 15 miles away from home, he can't get in his car and drive home. What does he do? He's going to stay where he's at because he can't even walk that distance. If he's practicing, watch here. The Sabbath was important. God said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man, not... I get that confused. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He said it's important. So today, it's important to know that in the book of Acts, the church met on Sunday, the first day of the week.
Yeah.
The feast day of resurrection is on the first day of the week. Jesus' resurrection is on Sunday. The beginning of the church was on a Sunday. The early church met on Sunday.
Yeah.
Therefore, we believe that that's the day that we should come together for a worship service. But again, the Sabbath that God gave for the nation of Israel was not a worship day. It was a rest day. And I conclude today that when I got saved, I fulfilled what God required in the Sabbath rest. I no longer have to labor.
Yeah.
As salvation goes, I'm no longer working for it.
Yeah. Thank God.
Paul said in the book of Hebrews, though, there remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. We have a rest that's waiting, a different one. But today, I am celebrating a seventh-day Sabbath when I got saved. And I'm resting in it today. But these things are important to let us see how things are today, how they're celebrated, and how they can't be celebrating in a biblical manner because of one thing. There is no temple, and without the shedding of blood is no remission.
Yeah. Amen.